Tonight on Revolutionaries.
People are enormously creative. They're enormously surprising. They are not utilitarian and follow rules and so forth and so on. And the internet is the first time when we can hear all of them at once. And I think that for the next 10 or 20 years, we're going to see more surprises.
Tonight we explore the ideas of Google chairman Eric Schmidt and his colleague Richard Cohen in their book, The New Digital Age. They write in compelling and personal terms about the impact of technology today and the implications for tomorrow. Our moderator is best-selling author and Facebook Chief Operating Officer Sheryl Sandberg. Major funding for Revolutionaries is provided by the Intel Corporation.
Thank you. Well, it is really exciting to be back at the Computer History Museum with my good friend, mentor, colleague Eric Schmidt, and my friend Jared. Last time we were here, we were talking about Lean In, and today we are talking about the new digital age and the future of the world.
You know, I mean, you've really done this job on Google now, because I keep running into lean in within Google.
We're excited.
It's like you still work there.
We're excited, but it's a real treat for me. Eric, I owe my career to Eric. Eric was the first person who hired me in Silicon Valley, and many people wouldn't, so.
It worked out well for you. You've done so much better since you left Google.
Well, I feel lucky because we talk about this a lot. Everyone needs the mentors and sponsors in your life, and Eric has been that and continues to be that for me, and I'm so grateful. And I first met Jared when I first came to Facebook, and he is friends with our head of product, Chris Cox. And Chris said, there's this one guy in the State Department, and he totally gets it. And he runs around the world trying to get other people to get it. And so he has been a voice that has been super important to our industry and to technology, and I think to peace all over. So exciting to be here with both of you. So we're going to start at the beginning. You're both fairly busy dudes, right? I mean, job. And it's not even that obvious that you would even know each other that well. So let's start at the beginning. You tell the story so nicely in the book. How did you meet? And what would possess you to sit down and write this? Where does this card?
Well, you know, my friend Don wanted to visit his son who's fighting in Iraq. And so I went along. I figured, you know, Thanksgiving in Iraq with the troops would be sort of interesting. And so we show up in Baghdad. I think we were the first people to show up on a commercial flight. Sort of got lost in the airport with the Marines on the other side.
Did they know what to do with you? I mean, you're
no.
Go this way, sir. No? All right.
And so
Hi,
Jared,
here I am in Baghdad.
So
okay.
Jared, I meet Jared, and because it was such an interesting visit, my daughter Sophie was with us, and we took videos. And I remember playing the videos when I got home, and all I heard was Jared's voice. Talk.
Now, is that because he talked the most, or because he had the best things to say?
No, he just talked the most.
Well, what I remember about Eric, so we get to the airport, and normally people, when you arrive and you don't see the guards anywhere, they're like eager to get out of there. In Eric's case, they put this flak jacket on him, and they're ready for him to go. And what does he do? Before he will leave the airport to go to the green zone, he insists on asking the security detail to give him an in-depth history of flak jackets. And it's not because he's worried about his safety and security, it's because he's a geeky scientist and wants to really understand the history of flak jackets. Why is this Velcro here? At what stage in its history did it move from over there?
Why doesn't it protect certain parts of me?
Was there an answer to that?
Not one that Marines were willing to reveal.
But Sheryl, the lesson of this experience is, you know, when you travel in a war zone with somebody, you become very close with them. And since then, we've traveled to somewhere between 40 and 45 countries together. And when we first began this journey, we had an argument about stability versus instability. Eric wanted stability, nice hotels, kind of easy to go in and out.
Look, the basic problem here is that Jared does not like to go to normal places, right? So he has never been to South Korea, and he wants to go to North Korea.
And there's only one place I couldn't convince Eric to come to with me, which was Somalia. And it was probably better.
There's no hotels at all.
or government, or banks, or institutions. Yes, that is true.
So I'm still not going.
I already went. It's actually the one place where I don't think I'm going to go back.
Oh, shocking.
And of course, we go to South Sudan. We somehow convinced him to go to South Sudan. It's the world's newest country. So we get there, and 98% of South Sudan's revenue comes from oil. And the government in Khartoum has basically cut off the pipeline. And so they basically have no money, no roads, no police force, nothing. And so they have the leadership has an hour with the two of us. And what do they choose to do? Spend their entire time handing us their Android devices, asking us if we can debug maps for them.
So you're watching the video, and you're listening to Jared's voice, and this makes you want to write a book.
No, so I eventually talked to Jared, and we met in New York, and I said, what do you want to do? And he said, I wanted to write a book. And he started talking about his ideas, and I said, that sounded pretty interesting to me. Because it turns out that the foreign policy people sort of don't understand technology, and the technology people don't really understand foreign policy, and I certainly don't understand foreign policy. So in wandering around, you'd be shocked at how miserable most people's lives are like, right? We take the wonderful world around us for granted. We're very fortunate here. Maybe we could fix some of these problems.
If we work together. So the book starts out with two really bold sentences, and I'm going to ask each one of you about one. Eric, this was a hard one for me to read. You write the book, and it says, the internet is among the few things human beings have built that they don't truly understand. I know I don't understand the internet, but I felt very certain you did. And to be honest, if you don't understand the internet, I'm pretty sure really no one does. And even at the Computer History Museum, that's a little concerning. But Eric, what do you mean? What do you mean by we don't understand? That is built by humans, but we don't understand.
My career has been, for the last 35 years, within a half a mile of our physical location right now. And I'm constantly surprised. I think I kind of understand it, and then something wild and wacky comes out. I remember in 1993 sitting in my office a half a mile from here at Sun, thinking things are really boring and I kind of understand it all. And that was the month I saw Netscape, or what the Mosaic browser at the time. People are enormously creative. They're enormously surprising. They are not utilitarian and follow rules and so forth and so on. And the internet is the first time when we can hear all of them at once. And I think that for the next 10 or 20 years, we're going to see more surprises, more good surprises and more bad surprises. Right? And all of us here in this room, we live with this. Oh my God, WhatsApp worth $16 billion, as an example.
Just as an example. not relevant to today's discussion. Jared.
Sorry, Cheryl, I didn't. That was a little low blow.
Jared, the next sentence in the book is actually amazing. The internet is the largest experiment involving anarchy in history. You are a student and a scholar and a practitioner of what is civil society and what is democracy and states. Why is this anarchy?
So if you think about the definition of anarchy in the context of international relations, it was coined in the early 20th century around the idea that even though every piece of territory on Earth is or will be carved up into some kind of sovereign territory, the world is not governable in the sense that there's no central leadership. And then if you fast forward, every attempt that the world has made to try to create a global leadership body, it's basically been rendered ineffective, which is one of the challenges with international institutions. Then you look at the internet, with only 2.4 billion people online today and another 5 billion people coming online. Think about the trouble that states are already having in dealing with this mass migration to the online world. So then you add another 5 billion people, and the prospects of, one, replicating the laws of the physical world in cyberspace, seem very difficult. And then two, controlling the entire thing is a far more difficult experiment than controlling the physical territory.
We can't even agree on some basic rules between countries. So now we've got to deal with globalization, of issues of copyright, issues of censorship, issues of free speech, issues of morality and communications. What do we do when something bad is happening? And I think the other thing is that, and since we've been on book tour for a while, we've been talking about this, maybe there are limits to what the internet can do. Maybe there are some problems that not even the internet can solve.
At the Computer History Museum, you're willing to say such a bold statement?
We might discuss that.
There might be limits.
But also, we describe the internet in the book as the world's largest ungoverned space. And if you think about the instruments of state power, militaries, economic power, et cetera, they don't really work in the online world, say, as effectively as they do.
But talk about Westphalia.
So the Treaty of Westphalia, which basically established the international system of sovereign states, is based on an idea that you can, have different legal jurisdictions that are guarded by physical boundaries. All of that begins to break down as these worlds come online. What's interesting is what it does to disrupt the balance of power in the world. So one of the arguments we make in the book is that states will have their physical power, which is based on traditional instruments that we discussed before, but a state may be a cyber power in the online world when in fact it's very physically weak. So if you look at like Estonia and Sweden, these are two countries that can punch way above their weight in a world that's completely connected.
So after a couple of years of learning about foreign policy, mostly because Jared talks a lot, and I sort of concluded that foreign policy has not changed in a long time, right? It's sort of, there are these realists and these progressives and so forth, and he explained all this to me. So I thought, in technology, what's new, right? What is in fact new is the empowerment that smartphones and the internet are providing to citizens. That is in fact a new thing. Another thing that's new is data permanence, right? So the ability, information once essentially leaked or published is generally known and can't be put back in the box. We didn't have those opportunities or problems before. So that drives lots of issues in essentially a static world like foreign policy. So
again, you said a very bold thing here, which is the internet can't fix everything. What are those things? When you think about it, what are those things? Because as technologists, you and I, and many people in this audience, we are big believers in the power of what technology can do, of bringing it to more people. Your book focuses a lot on what happens when another 5 billion people come online. I know Google's very focused on that. Facebook's very focused. So many people in our audience are very focused on that. But thinking about the limitations is really interesting and not something Silicon Valley often does. What are those limitations?
Well, it's always a shock to technologists that there are some limits to our omnipotence. Sorry, that was a joke.
If only we could automate all the customers, for example.
That's right. These customers.
Very old Silicon Valley quote.
That's right. That was a joke, by the way. Please don't tweet that.
Yes.
I get in trouble, right? Cheryl gets in trouble, right? We're just like friends here. So where are the boundaries? When does the internet stop and just real bad stuff happen? And I think the answer is when you've got a civil war, like in Syria, or possibly what's going on in Ukraine and Crimea, which Jared can really talk about because he's quite an expert there. And so it's clear to me, and I want to go back to sort of the technology optimist view of this. We can fix education with the internet. It's huge. We can fix entertainment and access to information and entertainment. We can fix the empowerment of women. Women are treated very poorly in much of the world. We can fix corruption and so forth. But there is a threshold, it seems to me. We've been having this debate of, Jared, how would you fix Syria?
Well, to Eric's point, I think Syria and Ukraine offer two really compelling examples of a bug that exists in our techno-optimism. If you look at Syria, you have 150,000 people who've been killed, millions of refugees flooding across the border, chemical weapons used on at least 3 different occasions that we know of. And yet, there's no shortage of videos coming out of Syria. Each one of those videos is more horrific than the one that came before it. The government is setting up checkpoints to look at people's phones and see what exists on their various profiles.
No, talk about this, because Jared was just in Syria.
So,
another place I'm not going.
So I saw, you actually shouldn't go to Syria for a variety of reasons.
Thank you.
But I saw friends of mine that I hadn't seen in 9 years. And to provide some context, they told me a story about how they're minding their own business one afternoon, and all of a sudden their throats start to itch, their eyes start to water, they get dizzy, and they collapse. Fortunately, somebody came in from the other room to close the window. Apparently the chemical weapons had come in and affected them. And it took them a full month and a half to find out what had happened because of the information blackout. So they then go on to tell me a story about how in Damascus and Homs and some of the big cities, the government has set up these checkpoints where they ask you for your phone. And then they hold a gun to your head and ask for your login information, et cetera. And if they don't like what they see, as was the case with my friend's brother, they signal up to somebody on top of a building and order them to shoot. And that's exactly what happened. My friend's brother was shot in the head because of something they found on his phone. And what you're left with is a realization that what Syria needs, obviously, is a physical humanitarian intervention, but it also needs a cyber-humanitarian intervention in the sense that we expect dissidents and activists to be cybersecurity conscious and aware of these things. But the everyday Syrian who now has a phone and spends all day online trying to find out what's going on, they're just caught in the crossfire. And that's the largest number of people in this horrific tragedy that don't understand two-factor authentication, that don't understand why they should use the Chrome browser, that don't understand all these different things. And there's a real question that we as technologists who are geopolitically aware need to try to address, which is how do we make sure that the average citizen is secure online even if they're not physically secure?
So in the book, we use the example of Somalia, and we say that imagine, for purposes of discussion, Somalia was largely, the government is better now, but imagine no government at all for a while. But imagine the telecommunications industry, which is roughly 11% of the GDP and is the only legitimate, profitable business in all of Somalia, and everyone has smartphones. But there's nothing else. So the smartphone at that point becomes even more important. It becomes how you know where your friends are. It's how you get an alert that there's the other gang is around the corner. It's a safe routes. We heard a story when we were in Libya of schoolgirls who had used Google Maps to watch where the NATO bombing was so they could get themselves to school safely. So think about the importance of a smartphone. Now, imagine that you're wandering along in Somalia and your smartphone is taken by somebody, and now they've got your contact list, your friends, they can impersonate you, and so forth. These are very weighty issues.
It is interesting, to your point, I think when you think back at the atrocities committed during war in history, there was a sense of people didn't know. People didn't know. Had we known, we would have intervened. And I think the striking thing about Syria is we know.
But if I can just ask you, Cheryl,
yeah.
When you were at Google, one of the things, Cheryl, of the many amazing things she did at Google, she set up, she had the philanthropic and the social consciousness that others didn't at the company. It spent a lot of time talking about development world, growth rate, basically the problems of the third world. So it seems to me that since you started that, things have gotten better because they've gotten connected. But the other issues haven't gotten fixed.
That's right. No, and that is the striking thing. And it's to your point that the internet can't fix everything. Let's talk about how this affects the military. So you show up in Baghdad. They did give you a flak jacket, but it wasn't sufficient. I understand that. And we'll come back one other day and explain. The general will explain to us why the flak jackets are made they are. But how does this affect the military?
Well, my immediate reaction was we're still fighting the wars the old way rather than the new way. So all of our interventions seem to basically involve trying to deal with the citizens. What's the best thing that you can do for the citizens? Empower them. What's the best thing the military can do? Build them Wi-Fi towers and a reasonably protected fiber optic network, right? So that they can actually learn what's going on, empower themselves, figure out that the previous dictator was lying to them, right? Get all the facts, right? And then develop whatever kind of society that they're going to develop, along with economy and so forth. This is the last thing the military does, not the first thing. So one simple answer would be that since almost all of our fighting ultimately seems to involve civilians that can then be turned against us by evil people and so forth, Jared talks a lot about how the internet can change the perception of people. You know, they're in a religious school. This is the only way. This is the only way. There's no doubt. Right? So one of the things that the internet can do is can empower individuals. The natural strengths of the society can come out. Why don't we build those wireless networks? In Iraq, we came to learn that Saddam had not allowed people to use cell phones at all. And so after he was essentially in hiding, they started to have their first cell phones. We learned in Burma when we were there that the SIM cards were about $5,000, which is a fortune for anybody in Myanmar. And of course, after we were there last summer, they lowered the price of SIM cards from $5,000 to $5, and then the phone system fell over capacity.
But if I can chime in on the military side of it, we interviewed a group of Navy SEALs that had been on the Bin Laden raid, the process of researching this book, and we asked them, you know, what is the ideal technology that you wish that you could, have in combat. And we expected things like, robotic dolphins and sort of various other weird things. And they said, we don't need a new technology developed. What we need is for the procurement cycles to change so that we can bring our iPhone or Android into combat and keep track of where our colleagues are.
Wow.
They said right now, when one of my friends told me that right now when he has to jump out of a plane, he literally can't bring the battery. He can't, they have this tablet attached to them and a battery that's this big that lasts an hour and a half because they're not able to use over-the-counter technologies in combat. So that's one issue. The second issue is we talk a lot about the military-industrial complex. As it pertains to cybersecurity as a critical aspect of our military, we have a real challenge in the sense that cybersecurity is not achieved without agility, and agility is extremely compromised by the traditional ways that procurement cycles work. And then the third piece is if you think about traditional military assistance, helicopters, tanks, various weapons. When are we going to get to a point where, providing cyber assistance to countries that are being attacked by more powerful countries that are not just their physical neighbors, but their adversaries many continents over? This is a critical piece.
So what should we do about the Syrian Electronic Army? Right? They're organizing to do cyber attacks against Western targets. Are they a serious target? Is there some military strategy there? Is there some digital strategy? I don't know. But that needs to be in the conversation.
Well, and the Russians, what's interesting, you have this foreign fighter problem in Syria. You have 15,000 foreign fighters who are coming from all across the globe to fight in the civil war in Syria on one side or the other. By the way, a third of those are coming from Europe, and a third of the contingent coming from Europe are converts. So it really is a global problem. What's interesting and what's new that I've never seen before until Syria is the Russians are sending foreign fighters into Syria, except they're not coming to fight the physical war. They're literally sending software engineers to come fight on behalf of the Syrian Electronic Army. And sometimes they're sending them physically, sometimes they're fighting from afar.
Presumably in conjunction with Iran. Right.
So let's move from the military focus to the economy. So one of the things that happens with the advent of all this technology and so much progress and so much efficiency is a real crisis for jobs all over the world, particularly for the youth. How do you think, both of you, and I think Eric, particularly with your Google hat on, because I know from my time at Google, you cared so deeply not just about Google as a company, but about the impact Google has on the world, and I think you've done an amazing job leading there. No, I mean, Google has always had that, and I think all of us, Facebook, we all want to have that.
Facebook
we want to have that. We want to have a sense. How do you think about, I know you travel broadly in the developed world as well, how do you think broadly about the impact technology has on jobs, and particularly for the youth unemployed throughout Europe, throughout Asia?
It seems to me that the jobless problem is going to be the defining problem for most of the rest of our lives. As interesting as it is to talk about Ukraine and Syria and so forth, we live and work in this economics we've accepted. And roughly speaking, for the last decade or so, there's been quite a displacement of manufacturing jobs because of automation. It's well now documented that you need fewer people to build the car. The process is more robotic. With advances in artificial intelligence and computers, many of which are done in this area, this problem gets work for knowledge workers who have relatively repetitive jobs. And there turn out to be a lot of such categories. So corporations, if you look in the United States as a classic example, are substituting essentially labor for capital. In other words, they're basically capital for labor. They're actually investing ahead of hiring. And the people who win in this process tend to be the incumbents, they tend to be the middle-aged, and they tend to be the elites. So if you model out going forward, you have a very significant problem because of the lack of jobs. Now, there are economists who believe that there will be jobs, that we don't have a jobless problem, but it's a transfer of middle-class, relatively high-paying jobs to service jobs. And think of this as sort of the Uber driver, right? A talented person who's working in a normal job and they're laid off or something bad happens. And so now they have contingent employment in a job, which is a service job, and they do the best that they can. And there are plenty of examples of that. And most economic thought says that jobs, it will be less predictable, especially for young people. There'll be more contingent and so forth. Now, there's a separate set of public policy issues around that. Because in that situation, you need some kind of a social safety net. We can have a debate as to how to do that. But you basically can't have people begging on the streets in America. It's just not going to be okay. And in Europe, you have the problems are effectively worse for the reasons that you can imagine: lack of lack of capital formation, lack of competition, lack of globalization, and so forth. So in talking, and this is something I've been working on for this year, and in talking to people, I think there's a couple of solutions, and they're not good enough. And I would ask everybody here to help me think about how we're going to solve this problem. Because if it is the defining problem, especially for the next generation, it's our problem too. The first is, you got to fix education. We can debate how to do that, but you're going to have a more educated workforce because the uneducated jobs are being automated out. That seems relatively straightforward.
And we all believe in this. We watch this happening every day.
I think very clear. I think the next thing you have to do, and by the way, I should say that you and I were with Mark, where Mark gave a very similar speech last summer.
Yeah.
So I know that Mark agrees with me on these things. The second thing is to focus on immigration, right? Not because we want to replace the current workers by immigrant workers, but because immigrants tend to form companies. There's a lot of correlation with sort of great outcomes from allowing immigration. Another one is connectivity, right? To build global brands. And then the fourth one that is missed, I think, is you've got to create an environment where incumbents can't block new entrants. So you have to have a place, right? Some place where startups can flourish, where the regulators won't kill them. Now you sit there and say, well, isn't that kind of obvious? Most industries are highly regulated, and without passing judgment, the regulators and the regulatees have gotten to know each other really well. And the new startups, the incumbents, the new ideas, they're not at the table. So an awful lot of the regulations tend to favor the incumbents or the structural incumbents. You got to fix that. This may not be sufficient, but I'm sure that the list I just gave you is necessary.
No, I think there's no doubt. And you also have a lot.
One more thing.
Yeah,
So here we are. We're all obsessed with China. China's tremendous success. Great job. So here you are, and imagine that we're the equivalent of the Politburo, and we're having a conversation about China in 20 years. We look at the demographic trends, disastrous one-child policy and all of that, and then we look at the automation trends. And then we realize that a couple 100 million people's jobs, which are in these manufacturing sites, are going to be replaced by robots. What are you going to do? It's not just a US problem. It's not just a Europe problem. It's a global problem.
So the last question I'll ask, and obviously a very important one to me, and I know to both of you, and then I know we're going to take questions from audiences, so please submit yours from the audience, is on women. Obviously something I'm deeply passionate about. And unsurprisingly, but I think quite sad, the benefits of technology don't equally accrue to men and women today, much as the benefits of leadership. So women are nearly 25% less likely to be online all over the world. Part of that is due to not having the capital that men have to buy technology. Part of that's due to the investment we make in education. Women are, much more likely to be illiterate because parents will put, and society will put their boys in schools, not their girls, which makes them less able to earn the money, less able to use technology. There was a report just put out that if you got internet access to an additional 600 million women in the next 3 years, which given the rate of growth is not out of hand, should be able to be possible, but not going to happen at the same rate as men, you would increase GDP across 144 countries, which are the poorest of the countries, by 13 to 18 billion. So we know that investments in women pay off for our economy, and we know investments in women pay off at higher rates for the well-being of children and their health and their own education. So it's a very good virtuous cycle. But we're caught in the non-virtuous cycle of investing more in men in all ways, including in technology. How do you think this changes? How do we make sure people understand all over that this technology has to equally be in the hands of women and as men? Jared, I know you've worked on this at the State Department.
Yeah, so one of the things that Secretary Clinton used to say is, we talk a lot about women's issues, but she would remind us that more than 50% of the world's population are women. So whether you're talking about non-proliferation, counterterrorism, civic activism, you could literally talk about any issue in the entire world, and it's a women's issue by virtue of the smartest people on Earth being women and the majority of people on Earth being women. To me, what I would say is,
we appreciate the compliment.
but I think you could make your statement even in a way that's even stronger, in the sense that I think there's something that the numbers don't account for. So I've spent a lot of time in autocratic countries, and in particular religiously restrictive societies that either by law or norm have held women back. And there's an observation that I've made and many of my friends have made, which is when women, for instance, in the Middle East get a chance to go to school, they outperform the men exponentially, right? And you know, it's a
as they do here.
As they do here. And what's interesting, a friend of mine in Kuwait told me something very interesting that may or may not be true, but she said, you know, the problem we have in Kuwait right now is we need more women's empowerment. But if you game this out 5 years now that women are all going to school, the men, 80% of the men work in the government, which means they don't show up and they just go to shopping malls and play video games all the day. So she said, fast forward 5 to 7 years, and in Kuwait, you're going to be talking about a need for men's empowerment.
So Cheryl, you'll remember when we did this about 10 years ago, you started talking to us about microlending. And it turns out that the great success in the developing world was microlending, and the people who managed all that money were women, because the men were louts. And that's my simplification of the description that I was given. And I think that that's probably true with phones and connectivity as well. So I think it's not too hard to see that if we just figure out a way to get inexpensive phones. And by the way, the low price on an Android phone in China is about $100. These are very powerful smartphones. Those prices are falling, more or less correlated with Moore's law. So you could imagine $70, $50 within 3 to 5 years, which are price points which, even in a microlending situation, people can use their smartphones. And imagine that that phone is loaded with information about literacy and culture and things like that. You could, in a small number of years, by giving these phones effectively to women, solve the educational problem, the early childhood education problem. There's a lot of correlates with respect to childhood IQ and involvement of parents and so forth. You could talk to women about taking care of their kids when they're very young, helping them do all of that. You could have a huge change. I mean, like hundreds and hundreds of millions of people that are empowered. Eventually, they've got to win against the oppressive male structures. I just can't imagine when we were in Saudi Arabia, the women behind the veil, they're texting. Right? They're communicating, right? They're incredibly intelligent.
What a powerful image, right? Behind a veil.
Behind the veil.
But texting.
And
so connecting with the world.
Well, what's
the best professors, the best achievement, and so forth. We actually visited one of these universities. At some point, the men just have to give up. Right.
Well, Cheryl, can I? This notion of behind the veil is very interesting. There's a story that I can't resist telling. When we were in Pakistan, we met a group of women who'd been attacked by the Taliban with acid. Something people talk a lot about in Afghanistan, but don't talk about as much in Pakistan. And we went to visit these women, and through no fault of their own, the physical scars that they bear, they carry a terrible stigma in society that doesn't let them work, doesn't allow them to walk on the streets without being ridiculed, et cetera. So we're talking to these women, and we ask them how they're able to be so optimistic, and one of them smiles and shows us her phone. And they all live in this house together, and they're training in various technical skills and learning how to surf online. And one woman said to us that she loves the internet because online her scars are invisible, so the internet's given her a second chance at life. Now you think that's amazing. This woman then met a man online who she started chatting with, who eventually she met in real life, and now they're married. So, you think the internet doesn't matter. I can't think of a group of women that are more disenfranchised, more humiliated, more beaten down than acid victims in Pakistan. And you look at how the internet has literally allowed them to once again enjoy life and enjoy its benefits.
Yeah, it's an amazing story. Okay. How will issues related to net neutrality, I think this one's for you, Eric, affect easy and cheap access to bandwidths? What are some proposed solutions?
In the developing world, most of the telecoms are still monopoly or near monopoly providers. And you're not going to get really good internet access until you have competition in those places. An example is that in Africa, the average internet connection costs more than it does in the United States. But you can imagine how foolish that is.
That's right. And if you divide that by the percentage of GDP, it's astronomically expensive.
It's just a terrible thing. And so the bigger problem, I think we can solve the smartphone problem with price because it's a consumer product. But an even bigger problem is going to be getting the reasonably quality bandwidth to these countries and getting those networks upgraded. So we need that competition. In the US, a lot of people have been studying this. How do we do this? We do not have common carrier laws that apply to the internet. And so a combination of public pressure so that the internet is not used to favor particular content. But ultimately, I think our answer remains the same, competition. If you only have one provider of something and you don't have another choice, That would be an example of not having enough competition.
How do you see human interaction evolving in a world that is increasingly automated? It seems the more connected we become, the more distant we become from living in the physical world. And it's interesting because this is something you wrote about in your book. In your book, you wrote, there are two worlds at once. This virtual world where we all experience some kind of connectivity, and a physical world where we still have to contend with geography, randomness of birth, bad luck, and the good and bad sides of human nature. Your book explores the ways this virtual world and this physical world interact. And I think both what you said and this question really get to that. How do you see one impacting the other?
I'm working on turning off my phone during dinner.
How's that going?
You're never going to do it.
How's that going? Wait, we have real life. Wendy? What percentage? We're doing? 80's good.
I'm working on it. You know, it's difficult. Dinner is short. You know,
Short,
I can
but
count
uninterrupted.
the minutes, right, before I can turn it back on.
For what it's worth, by the way, when we were disconnected from the internet in North Korea, Eric, after 5 minutes of not having his devices, I literally saw his thumbs starting to twitch. So I'm saying that I think this is actually a medical problem. More
Specific to Eric, or you think broader in the general
definitely to
population?
Eric, probably to me, maybe to everybody out here.
So you know, the good news is we really have, again, you all together have built this amazing interactive world. But humans are the same. You know, we do get addicted to things. There are terrible stories of people who've become online addicted with terrible outcomes. And so it's important to know where the off button is and learn how to turn it off. I'm working on dinner. And I think the deeper part of the question is, what's it doing to the way we interact? And the sort of the traditional people say, well, you know, I don't have any friends anymore. I said, no, you have hundreds of friends. You interact in different ways. Remember the whole bowling alone? It's clearly false. Right? You're bowling with everyone.
But the impact on identity is interesting,
real.
right? So for all of us, more people will come to know us digitally than will ever meet us in the physical world.
Especially with your daughter.
Especially with my daughter.
Because her entire digital record is going to be on her email.
Although I made a decision.
And she's going to be 10,000 emails behind
I made a decision
when
not
she's
to.
2.
No sonogram
But that's
online.
okay. This is a great idea.
Yes, Jared's decided that it's not okay to post sonograms before birth.
There's no opportunity for consent with like a burp or a laugh or a smile or something. But the point is what this means.
So what are you going to do? You're going to hold it up in front of the new baby saying, can I post this picture of you?
She might say yes. Unclear.
Good luck.
But what
Parenting is quite different than you think it will be before you do it. There's nothing better than talking to someone who doesn't have kids yet. This is how it's all going to
You know
work.
what Eric told me when I first told him we were having a baby? His first response wasn't congratulations, I'm happy for you. It was resist the urge to think that you're the first person on earth to ever have a child. I forget where I was going with this point. But on identity.
On identity.
Yeah, so on identity, because we'll be better known online than people will interact with us in the physical world, what it means is the implications of what we do online are probably of greater consequence in determining our identity, and that's challenging because we have less control.
But the way to think about this is that you start off, your brand new baby, you have like complete control over your identity, except that you have him as your dad. And as you age, right, the percentage of control over your identity decreases. So by the time your daughter gets to the year 2100, right, so 90-ish, near 90, think about the percentage and so forth description of her, where she was, where she did, and all the things that will happen compared to who she really is.
And it's not just
we haven't figured this out yet.
And it's not just what we say and post about ourselves, it's what others say and post about us. So we basically are sort of one unit in an entourage of people that are shaping who we are.
It's interesting. It brings up another thing I know we're all working on, which is that how do we think about the responsibilities companies have for privacy and security, for the Googles, for the Facebooks, for everything we do, and also the increasingly American element to the internet, right? We are in a system, and you know this better than anyone, where countries are increasingly having voice for data localization for what has been a very good global system for the bifurcation of the control of data, which I think ties to the identity of their citizens and ties to some of the ideas you have in the book about virtual statehood in a virtual state. How do you think about how all of these connect, the individual privacy, company responsibility, and data localization?
In the paperback, which comes out tomorrow, we actually say very clearly
That's right.
That,
There's the paperback.
thank you. Coming out
I got it
tomorrow.
early.
$12 on Amazon plus sales tax. Free shipping.
Easily multiple times that in learning.
So,
And easy to carry around. Great pictures on the back.
Thank you, Cheryl.
thank
I
you.
think it's great. It's a must buy. You heard it here first.
So,
There's even a robotic hand. It's
by
very
the
well
way,
done.
that's the cover art was done by Jeff Koons.
Oh.
Hold that back up again.
It's really actually pretty amazing.
Yeah, Jeff Koons.
All the different hands.
The
One's virtual, kind of. Or I guess real, robotic.
He's an artist. The Snowden revelations did a real number on our relations with a whole bunch of countries. Think about
Yes,
Germany.
they did.
Germany, for example. And Cheryl and I have been spending lots of time dealing with the consequences and the perception of American NSA activities and so forth. And this is a good example of what will happen in the future, because countries aren't going to stop spying on each other. And no one quite knows how to solve this problem. An example is a couple weeks ago, Angela Merkel indicated that she would be in favor of actually having data localization within Germany, which sounds like a great political thing, but it's one, not workable, two, it breaks the internet, and is a very bad idea for the German citizens. We're facing similar issues for
And for
both
citizens
companies.
all over the world.
We're facing similar issues in Brazil for both companies and so forth. So I don't think we've quite figured out all the consequences of that on a government sense. On a privacy sense, again, Facebook has been through the same sorts of travails. You ultimately have to say to citizens, we will keep your information private. You have to decide, you have a responsibility for how much you want to disclose, where you want to disclose it. You can't just blindly assume that it's the old model. The new model has a lot more subtlety in it.
So, and I did not plant this question, but I want to thank whoever wrote it. There's a lot in the press recently about the lack of women in computer science. And the numbers which you are well aware of, and we're all well aware of, is that in the 1980s, women were getting 35 to 37% of the computer science degrees. We're down to 13. If you believe this is important, if you believe the wage gap matters, if you understand that technology jobs are so important to future employment and they're better paid, you have to worry about equality, you have to worry about the wage gap increasing. There's a lot to worry about with women not being in computer science. Google, very much to Eric's credit and to Larry and Sergey's credit, absolutely the forerunner of this. Even when I joined Google, which was not that many people were there, very focused on women in computer science and recruiting. But it's an issue for all of us, because if you're recruiting from 13, if you got 13%, it's very hard to get women. How do you think about this? How do you think about this for Google? How do you think about this in terms of how we encourage more women all over the world?
You can understand the women's lack of women in our society as sort of an escalator problem. There's sort of an escalator that people follow. There's a lot of evidence that women get off that escalator at various points for reasons that have been fairly well established, and we need to address them. This is a real national crisis for America, and there are plenty of fields where they have figured this out. A classic example is in biology, where a majority of scientists are now women. So it is possible to do this. Many people, many sort of old white guys like me have talked about this, and we've not come up with a better set of ideas than empowerment, training, making the stuff cool. There's a problem, as you know, with sort of in the teenage years. And again, you write about this in your book. And I think we've got to come up with a consensus of how we're going to guide this. We need the IQ, we need the talent.
It's amazing. I mean, even in our own area, so I sent my son to computer camp, ID Tech Camp. It's a great program. A lot of people do it. 2 years ago in Silicon Valley. So you don't know this yet, but Eric does, but you'll learn. At 7, you're pretty much deciding what your kids are doing for the summer. So it is the parents' decision. Silicon Valley ID Tech Camp, 35 kids, 5 girls. Of the 5 girls, I put 3 in myself because it was my niece and her 2 friends. So anyone who thinks this is about to get better needs to look at that. Now, ID Tech Camp is coming out this summer, and they're doing programs only for girls to try to encourage. But it's really a stereotyping problem, and I think the impact on the future can't really be underestimated. How are you going to think about this for your daughter?
Well, I think, it's
4 weeks from now when you have said daughter.
Given I'm an expert on parenting, no, I think my view on this, again, not being an expert on it, is, start early. And there are, I mean, you hear about things like Goldie Blocks and others. People are working to try to figure out how are there ways to create opportunities for young girls to get inspired and excited about engineering camp is another example, but there's clearly not enough examples of this. And you can't, I don't believe, you can't wait until your child gets to college and is deciding a major. If you don't start earlier, then you lose that early investment where it actually shapes what they want to do.
There may be a solution not due to our good work, but simply because as the engine room stuff gets better, and if you accept the stereotype of more men in the engine room, the opportunities at a platform layer for the kinds of things that it appears that women care a lot about to build massive new companies are clearly going to be there. And so it's possible that we will solve this problem by just moving up the stack. When I started, there were essentially no women in computing at all, but nothing was visual. There was no interaction. It was very, very, very nerdy, speaking as the local nerd. And at Google, for example, we have large swaths of activities where there's a whole bunch of women working on it. They're very, very good at it. And I think that that's where the growth's going to be. So I'm very worried about this 13%, but I'm also heartened by the fact that in America, we're producing very, very analytically skilled women, and they're in other fields. So maybe we can attract them to work on these problems.
That's right. It's one of the things I know Google's done. It's one of the things Facebook's done is we've taken women with other technical skills and helped them run. So going to towards the end of our time here, looking towards the future, one of Google Ideas' goals, which I know you are now part of Google working with Eric on, is to end censorship. And I think you're not in the book, but you've said by 2024, which seems like a very specific date, we're going to end censorship. Why take up this goal? What are you going to achieve it? How did you pick 2024? What's happening here? Because that's obviously something that is a big and bold aspiration.
So one of the things, I mean, a lot of the travel that we did was to countries that were more autocratic, and those are the places that are still coming online. And it seems that one of the big wild cards in the future is how will autocratic regimes fare? And every citizen that we met in an autocratic society, you won't find a single one that aspires to connect to a repressively censored internet. Right? And so surely we should sort of help that not happen.
Right. I want to see only, yeah.
And it sounds like an obvious thing, but I don't, if it's so obvious, then where are the prescriptions associated with it? So we had this sort of lofty moonshot of can we make repressive online censorship irrelevant within a decade? And right now, there's a lot of people who are doing interesting proxy and circumvention work, but there's two problems with the existing efforts. One, they don't scale because anyone that is successful in this, the government quickly shuts it down. And the second has to do with trust, which is you don't know the origin of a particular proxy or tool. And so what we decided to do is leverage the smart engineers that we have at the company, but also outside the company to figure out, are there tools that we can build that will help address two critical problems. One, content being taken offline through DDoS attacks and other means, and the second is the filtering challenge of repressive regimes censoring the internet from its population, and we're well underway in terms of building some of these products.
I think it's fair to say that the life of autocratic dictators is going to get a lot worse because of the empowerment. And
it's been great, but it's going downhill.
Yeah, it was a good gig while you had it.
Good gig while you had it.
That's right. And again, it goes back to what's new, right? We've always had problems, geopolitical problems, narcissism, crazy leaders, that kind of stuff, despots, et cetera. The empowerment of the individual, because of the technology that we all build, is a new problem for them. They can't shut the internet down completely. If you do that, the middle class assumes you're really scared and picks the other side. We talk about this in the book. So the reality is you have to work with the internet, which means your citizens are going to get empowered. Classic example is China. China, as you know, has banned us in one form or another and likely to do for a very long time. So there are new services in China, WeChat and Weibo being the two most popular examples. So WeChat is an example of a link chain where you do a series of messages to a private set of group, but it can be very large. And by the way, you can do e-commerce with this and pictures and so forth, and it's heavily censored. So what happens when you have a clever idea and every person in this room thinks it's such a clever idea and you begin to send it to all of your friends? and 10 million people think this is a great idea. There's not enough prisons, there's not enough police, there's not enough to hold that back. So even in a repressive regime, you've got to fear the results of empowering your citizens who discover that you're doing a bad job.
So we have time for one last question. I want to ask both of you. And Jared, we can start with you and then let Eric end. What are you most pessimistic about the future, and what makes you most optimistic? What is the one thing that you're most pessimistic about in terms of the future, and what is the one thing where you're most optimistic?
So I'd say the thing that I'm most pessimistic about touches on something we spoke about before, which is there's a number of challenges. You know, we'd like to think technology is a silver bullet answer for the world's problems, but there's still mass killing. There's still huge portions of the world's population living in abject poverty, and I wish that technology could instantly solve those challenges. And the reality is more connectivity betters everybody's lives, but it doesn't solve the problems of socioeconomic divides, right? You know, there are limits, and so you know, I don't know if that's pessimism.
In fact, it may make those worse. Maybe creating some of those divides.
In some respects, it could exacerbate the problem. The thing that I'm most optimistic about is we're basically going to experience the most individually empowered global citizenry that the world has ever known. So, you know, if you think about even a place like China. In China, right, the world's most populous repressive society, you're going to have 1 billion people come online in 1 decade. In one country, it will happen one time, and it will never happen again. Imagine how that ability to know what's happening in the cities, to have access to the world's information, to have the opportunity to make choices and decisions. It's game-changing. Now, there's challenges, as we talk about in the book, but this notion that a citizen is going to be more empowered with choices and options than at any other time in history has to be a huge benefit for the world.
Eric, pessimistic and optimistic.
When Jared and I started the book, we didn't quite know how we would view sort of the future for the developing world as well as the developed world. And I can say that having worked on this for now 3 years, we're very optimistic about the overall benefits of this technology, but especially for the developing world as well as for the developed world in the scenarios that you quoted. There are 2 areas that I'm worried about. The first is the question of and I'll pitch them as races. It's a race between the good guys and the bad guys. In a situation where the technology can be militarized and used to really hurt people, the technology can allow for scale and damage. Right? And there are a number of possible scenarios there. And I worry about that. I worry that that's a race and that we don't fully understand some of the platforms and implications of things that we might be doing that might empower evil people. And we've got to think about that. We have a moral responsibility as technologists to think about it. The second one is the jobs question. And there, the race is the race between computers and humans. And by the way, I'm clearly on the human side on this. The humans have to win, right? The humans have to win, and
that's right. I mean, there's like 5 or 6 human hands here.
That's right. The humans
so just one. The ratio is very good.
The humans have to win. And the reason the humans have to win is that the things that are uniquely human, judgment, creativity, and so forth, have to shine while many of these infrastructures are getting built. And the human systems to deal with human failings, governments, and so forth, have to be updated. And I worry that it's not happening fast enough. So in the first case, I worry that we don't understand who we're empowering. And the second one, I think we understand the problem, but the human systems, we're still arguing the last decade's problems rather than arguing how we're going to politically and culturally solve the future problems.
Well, please everyone join me in thanking these 2 brilliant minds and great writers.
Thank you all. Thank you, Sarah.
The New Digital Age is full of insight about the international impact of technology on democracy, citizenship, security, freedom, and personal relationships. There are hundreds of stories like this at the Computer History Museum. Join us next time for the Computer History Museum presents Revolutionaries.